So I would like to add my welcome to you all and say what really a joy it is to be here, to begin this settling in, arriving together. I also bow to your commitment and your dedication to take this time and take this space in your life, and the wisdom of putting aside the activities and responsibilities and the to-do lists. It's a great gift to yourself. It's a great gift to the world. I think of a poem that really, for me, captures in very few words the kind of this taking a pause in our lives, and it's a poem by Martha Postlethwaite called Clearing. And she says, "Do not try to save the whole world or do anything grandiose. Instead, create a clearing in the dense forest of your life and wait there patiently until the song that is yours alone to sing falls into your own cupped hands and you recognize and greet it. Only then will you know how to give yourself to this world so worthy of rescue." This sense of creating a clearing in the dense forest of our lives and waiting patiently, really until the wisdom and the love and the connection arises naturally. I've been very, very moved this week, and I'm sure many of you too have, by the presence, in the full sense of that word, of Pope Francis and coming to Washington, coming to this country, and just felt just an incredible sense of his humility and his love, compassion. And I felt my heart had been opened by his presence. You know, I was a Catholic for the first 15 years of my life and kind of let go of felt the dogma and the doctrine was something I really kind of didn't have a lot of need for. But it's lovely that he's appeared out of kind of seemingly out of nowhere, and is a gift obviously not just to Catholics, but I think like His Holiness the Dalai Lama to the world that so needs awakening beings. And so this evening I just want to share a few words about the taking refuge and about the precepts that help support us in being together on retreat. Taking refuge in the Buddhist tradition, there are 3 refuges. Often they're called the 3 jewels. And the taking refuge in the Buddha, taking refuge in the Dharma, taking refuge in the Sangha. And as we live in the world, if you think about your life and you think about kind of the lives we tend to live in our culture, we find refuge in many places and things and people that actually don't provide us with genuine happiness or freedom or peace. You know, sometimes we can take refuge in food or drink or drugs or sex or things that we think will make us happy. But we find we could have more and more and more of them, and the heart isn't happy, we're not at peace, we're not free. Sometimes we take refuge in kind of avoiding certain things, like I don't want this, I need this out of my life. But again, we don't find freedom there. Sometimes we try to take refuge in escaping from things that we don't like, escaping into fantasy or into daydreams or on the internet or TV. And, probably all of us have, in parts of our life, perhaps for long parts of our life, sought refuge in things that don't actually provide genuine happiness, that come to an end, that pass. And so the Buddha's teachings point to genuine freedom, true freedom, not from coming from getting things or even avoiding things, but from an open heart that recognizes that love, that freedom, that peace is available, is here right now. Another poem, just a couple of lines from Dorothy Hunt. She says, peace is this moment without judgment. Peace is this moment without judgment. This moment in the heart space where everything that is welcome. That the freedom, the true peace that the Buddha's teachings point to and the Buddha pointed to is not dependent on changing conditions. It's not dependent on getting or having or avoiding, but is really present. It's here right now. It's in an innate awareness. It could be called lots of things. It could be called our Buddha nature, our natural goodness. It could be called loving presence, open-hearted awareness. It's what the great Thai teacher Ajahn Chah called the one who knows. There's that quality within us that knows, that heart quality, that knows what leads to happiness and what leads to suffering, but so often is clouded over, by the kind of the ego-identified mind, the fearful. We go into that place of fear and we think, oh, I need this, I need to get rid of this, I need to have this. But these practices invite us to wake up, to abandon that kind of those false sense of identification and take refuge in our awakened heart. This is really what taking refuge in the Buddha means. I mean, it can have a meaning of course, of taking refuge in the historical Buddha and this extraordinary being 2,500 years ago who laid out, for me, probably the most comprehensive roadmap of the human heart and the mind imaginable. Skillful means to work with every condition that could arise. It just is such a panoramic understanding of the human heart and the human condition, human life. So taking refuge in the Buddha is taking refuge in that awakened being that kind of shows us the way, but really points us back to the awakened heart, our own awakened heart. So this is taking refuge in the Buddha. And I invite you just for a moment just to touch in, maybe if you like to close your eyes. And in the Pali, they say, Buddham saranam gacchami. I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in this awakened heart, this awakened mind. This capacity of this heart and mind to awaken, to open to love, to open to the peace that, another tradition they call the peace that surpasseth understanding. Yes, passeth understanding. I take refuge in the Buddha. And the second of these refuges that are not dependent on conditions, on getting and having, is what's called taking refuge in the Dharma. And the taking refuge in the Dharma is this beautiful understanding that freedom is already here and now. It's taking refuge in the truth. It's taking refuge in reality. It's not resisting. Even some of the things Pat talked about of like when we get caught up, when we get identified, when we get caught up in fear, to see that this is a passing condition, and we can open to this too, that everything can be contained, everything can be, we can open our heart to whatever is arising. And that's really taking refuge in reality, taking refuge in the truth, taking refuge in the Dharma. And again, we can see this in a more kind of specific and somewhat more limited way of taking refuge in the Dharma, the teachings of these extraordinary teachings of the Buddha, the teachings and practices of the Buddha. But even broader, it's taking refuge in the truth, in not resisting life as it's unfolding. And of course we make choices, but not to say no, to say yes to this moment. What's here right now? What's here in my body? What's here in my heart? What's here in my mind? Can I say yes to this moment as it is? Can I open my heart to this too? And when we do this, when we cultivate the willingness and the openness to do this, our hearts, there's no end to how wide our hearts can open. They can contain even the most painful and most difficult conditions, circumstances, experiences, if we allow ourselves to say yes. And all the skillful means, all the practices that we'll be doing this week are just ways of doing that, of helping that, of supporting us. Because at first, yes, we go to the place of fear and fright and fight and flight. We go to the place one teacher calls the mini-me, the kind of like this ego-identified mind. And it's quite natural. It's not bad. We're not doing anything wrong. But we can see that that's a very narrow, limited identification. It's not our true self. It's not our true happiness. And that we can wake up out of that. And so this is waking to the truth of the Dharma, opening, taking refuge in the Dharma, taking refuge in reality, taking refuge in the truth of life as it is unfolding. So just to pause and connect with what this means for you. Dhammam saranam gacchami. I take refuge in the Dharma. I take refuge in the truth, in the unfolding of life as it is. I take refuge in reality. And the third of these refuges is taking refuge in Sangha, taking refuge in community. And this beautiful refuge is everything that we're practicing, everything that we're doing here, feeling the commitment, the diligence, the open-heartedness of everybody else, how we support each other in our practice, how we hold each other up, how your stillness and as you walk and the way I can see, your opening to being really as present as you can be, how that kind of is a mirror to myself, and to each of us. It's a reminder to us, oh yes, be here. If I might be caught up in some story in my mind of some holding. And taking refuge in community, taking refuge in the Sangha. And again, it can have a more specific meaning of taking refuge in those awakened ones who have shown us the way, shown us the path through their hearts and opening their hearts and minds. But it's taking refuge in the community and all of us who are on this path of awakening. And the truth is that all beings are on this path of awakening. Some of us are explicitly saying, oh yes, this is my life. This is how I want to live my life. And for others, it's not knowing yet. The heart's not yet woken up to the possibility of living life in a different, in a less identified way, a more open-hearted way. But we can see ourselves as all beings, as being on this path of opening, of awakening our hearts. So taking refuge in this awakening together. We'll be awakening together this weekend and this week. So just to, again, touch into, for you, what this means to you, taking refuge in Sangha. Sangham saranam gacchami. I take refuge in the Sangha. I take refuge in the community. I feel your heart, I feel your diligence and your commitment to waking up, and that supports me in my practice, in my willingness to sit with what's difficult or painful. Sangham saranam gacchami. So you might this week and this weekend just come back, if you like, to these refuges that are not dependent on conditions. They're not dependent on whether, you got that job or whether, you get some bad, difficult health news. These conditions are here. The refuges are here, whatever the conditions of life are. That we can come back to the awakened heart. We can come back to the truth, taking refuge in the Dharma, and we can come back to the community of beings waking up together. And another. So let me pause. Let us pause just for a moment. And I share a few reflections on the precepts. That support our practice here together. In the Buddhist teachings, there are three. You can think of the Buddhist teachings as kind of a threefold training in awakening. A training in the Pali language is called Sila, Samadhi, and Panya. Sila is ethics or virtue. Samadhi is meditation or training the mind, formal training of the mind. And Panya is wisdom. And the Buddha's Eightfold Path, the path the Buddha laid out to help us awaken the heart and the mind, is a training in these three areas of practice. Our practice is like these three legs of a stool. If we only have the meditation and the wisdom, and we don't live our lives in a virtuous way, a way where we're not harming others and not harming ourselves, and committed to non-harming, committed to compassion, then there's something really fundamental that will be missing. Without, as one teacher of ours said, if you're out stealing and robbing and fighting all day, and then you come home and sit on your meditation cushion, what's likely to arise in the mind? Obviously, if we're harming others and harming ourselves, we're not creating the conditions for freedom of the heart. We're not creating the conditions for peace. That we have to train our hearts and minds in how we live, how we act in the world, how we speak, our behavior, our thoughts, and how we work with them. So there are the Buddha gave 5 precepts. And I think these are helpfully seen as training rules. Because easily if we come from other religious traditions or other traditions, they could seem like, the 5 commandments. Of do this, don't do that, and if you don't do this, this will happen to you. You go to hell if you don't keep this one, etc. But these aren't commandments. These are really kind of guidelines of practice or training rules. They're ways of living, ways of being together that lead to happiness and freedom. The Buddha saw that certain ways of acting and thinking and speaking lead to suffering, and others lead to happiness and well-being. And so abandon those that lead to suffering, cultivate those that lead to happiness and well-being. And for lay people, the Buddha invites us to take, and we invite you to take, these precepts just to reflect on them and make a commitment to living in this way for the time that we are together. They provide a container for our practice. They provide really a sense of safety for all of us. And I'll just name them first of all. You could put it as one way of saying it is, for the sake of my training, I vow to abstain from killing. I vow to abstain from stealing. I vow to abstain from sexual misconduct. I vow to abstain from lying and false speech. And I vow to abstain from intoxicants, consuming intoxicants that cloud the mind. When we take these precepts and reflect on them, what we're really inviting is a reflection. When we harm any being, we harm ourselves, we harm the world. So if we're going to cultivate happiness and harmony, then the invitation is to abstain from killing. And obviously we're not talking about, wouldn't need to say killing each other, but even killing or harming the smallest being. It's a way of reflecting on our practice. It's a way of helping ourselves wake up. It's a way of practicing kindness and generosity to other beings and connecting with all of the beings that are around us, because we're not the only ones here, are we? We can just open our ears and we can hear some of them right now that'll be sharing this space and this time with us. So to cultivate reverence for life, to cultivate non-harming. So just invite that, and just reflect perhaps for a moment. I, for the sake of my training, I vow to abstain from killing or harming any sentient being. And we know the suffering that's caused when we take that which isn't freely given. How do we feel if we have something and then somebody comes along and takes it? Obviously the same if we take something that's not freely given by somebody else. So the invitation is to respect each other's property, respect each other's well-being, and to abstain from taking anything that's not freely given. And let that be an exploration. Are there ways here, and we can obviously in our daily lives, are there ways in which I take what is not freely given? It could be as simple as, pencils and notepads from the office or something. We go, oh no, they've got lots of it. But it's a cultivation to bring awareness, to bring mindfulness to this aspect of non-harming, not taking anything that isn't freely given, and in that way supporting non-harming, supporting kindness and generosity to others, giving space to the other beings. So again, just to reflect for a moment, for the sake of my training, I vow to abstain from stealing, taking that which isn't freely given. And the third of these precepts, abstaining from sexual misconduct. And the invitation on retreat is to abstain from sexual activity. Even if one came with a partner, to give each other the space so that each can go inward and practice, and to be willing to practice restraint. In other ways we might be pulled towards, even thinking about sexual activity, and just again to practice seeing the mind going there as a natural thing where the mind will go, and inviting ourselves back, inviting restraint. We know how much harm has been done, and that we probably all of us have done through lack of awareness of our sexual activity, of mindlessness in relation to sexuality. So this is an invitation. This practice is an invitation to bring awareness to every part of our lives, to our sexuality, to our relationships. So again, just inviting that reflection. For the sake of my training, I vow to abstain from sexual misconduct, abstain from sexual activity for this time, for this period. And the fourth of these training rules or precepts, to abstain from lying and false speech. And we won't be doing a lot of kind of the regular kind of speech that we might normally do. And so it's an invitation to perhaps bring awareness to our inner speech. The speech that we're saying to ourselves. Are we being honest in our speech to ourselves? Are we practicing wise speech? So the Buddha invites us, the teachings invite us to speak kindly in a timely way. So in the ways we will have an opportunity to speak this weekend and this week, to invite awareness of our speech, bringing mindfulness to our words and our inner words as well. So again, just taking a moment to reflect. For the sake of my training, I vow to abstain from lying and false speech, unkind speech. Perhaps cultivate kindness in my speech, my judgments, the words, inner words to myself and others. And the final for these precepts, to abstain from intoxicants that cloud the mind. Probably many of us have seen in our lives the harm that we've done to ourselves, perhaps, or seen others do to themselves through not being mindful of the use of intoxicants, of drink and drugs and other intoxicants. And the invitation for the time here is to abstain from any use of intoxicants, whether drink or drugs, obviously excluding prescription drugs that we need to take for our health and well-being. Again, it's the invitation for the mind to be open, to be clear, and not to be clouded by drink or drugs or any other intoxicant. Again, just inviting a reflection on this precept. For the sake of my training, I vow to abstain from intoxicants, taking intoxicants, and I vow to commit to cultivating a mind that's clear, open, loving. And with these precepts, and each of us in our way taking these precepts, we provide a space for each other. We provide a container of commitment to virtue, to living in a non-harming and in an ethical way. It's a gift of protection to ourselves and to others. So then may the refuges and the precepts be a support for your practice in this retreat, and all of us together as we practice, as we commit to awakening our hearts and our minds together. Thank you.